The Judith Basin wore late spring like an old coat, frayed at the cuffs, wind-whipped, and honest about it. Dust skimmed along the road like a low river. The little ranch house sat with its back to the weather, windows rattling, stove sighing now and then as if to answer. A man named Isaiah Keene stood inside, palm flattening against cold glass, eyes narrowed toward the bend where the stage was due to appear. He had the look of a fellow who'd carried more weight than his shoulders were made for, and kept carrying anyway. Out in the yard, two boys ran circles around the corral, Hamilton with his long-legged stride, Hayes with his small, stubborn sprint, laughter running ahead of them like a pair of colts. They knew nothing of what was about to arrive. Isaiah knew too much. He could feel the letter in his pocket the way a man feels a healed-over scar. He'd written it with awkward hands, sent it east, and waited for a reply that came back, yes. That little word changed the shape of his days. He wished it hadn't been necessary. Life doesn't much care what a man wishes. Grief had emptied the place over winter. Pneumonia took his wife so fast, the ground was still iron when he laid her down. The boys sobbed beside a grave the wind wouldn't leave be. He did what men do, kept the stock fed, mended what split, rose before light, and collapsed after dark. Yet the room stayed quiet as a church after service. He could not be Mama and Papa both, not for long. So he'd asked for kindness to come on a coach, asked for patience, asked for someone steady enough to teach two wild-hearted boys how to sit at a table again. The answer wrote itself across the horizon in a brown cloud and the heavy roll of wheels. The stage swung into view, brake whining, horses blowing hard. Isaiah wiped his hands on his trousers, squared himself, and stepped out into the grit. The driver set the step and opened the door. A woman climbed down, small at first glance, but not fragile, more like a sapling that had learned how to lean into wind without snapping. Her dress had a travel-worn plainness, brown hair pinned up neat, carpetbag clutched so tight the knuckles showed. She did not smile. Her eyes, hazel, careful, taking the whole place in, met Isaiah's and held. She seemed to decide whether her legs remembered how to move. He saved her the trouble, crossing the yard with a quiet crunch of dry gravel. "You must be Odella, Ma," he said, voice low, as if the land were listening. She nodded once. Odella Jennings. Her fingers trembled when his hand met hers, but her gaze didn't flinch. The boys peered from behind a post, part curious, part shy. A hard life teaches even children to read a day's weather fast. He spoke her name like it mattered. Then he showed her what mattered more. Hamilton's 6, Hayes is 4. His tone turned soft at the edges. They're loud. They're good. She watched the boys as if measuring the distance between fear and duty. He cleared his throat and gentled the moment. "You're welcome here," he said. "We can take it slow." It wasn't a line most men would offer. She heard it that way. A tightness eased a notch in her shoulders. "I'll do my best," she said, and it sounded like a vow she owed herself before she owed anyone. He took the bag when she let it go, led her inside, and let the kitchen say the rest. Clean surfaces, a stew's soft memory in the air, a table marked by small elbows and long evenings. The house didn't feel whole, but with her standing in the doorway, it wasn't empty either. Down the hall waited a room he'd prepared, fresh sheets, a place to breathe. "It's yours," he told her. "Settle as you please. There's no rush to speak on marriage." She studied him, searching for the catch. You asked for a wife, she said. I asked for help, he answered. Marriage can come later, if you want it. Her next question tested the ground under both of them. And if I don't? You'll still have a roof, he said, steady as fence posts in frost. And they'll have someone who cares. She held his eyes a long beat. Most men wouldn't say that. I ain't most men. The words weren't pride, just plain truth. She nodded and slipped down the hall with the quiet grace of a person who learned not to take up more space than necessary. That night, she helped settle the boys, reading from a thin book while her hands shook just enough for Isaiah to notice from the doorway. Hamilton said she smelled like flowers. She thanked him with a small, surprised smile, then passed Isaiah on her way to the kitchen. I'm scared, she whispered, the kind of confession that costs. I know, he said, I'll help you. When she asked why he was so kind, he met her eyes. Because I know what loss feels like. The house heard that and held its breath. They shared coffee that had waited too long on the stove. They didn't talk much. Sometimes the best kindness is leaving words alone. When she went to bed, she didn't turn the lock. Outside, the wind walked the hills and rattled the eaves like an old friend with bad timing. Inside, something small and stubborn began to warm. Morning came slow and pale. Odella rose before the boys, tied her hair back, found an apron, and set about cooking with the thrift of someone raised on little. Cornmeal in the skillet, eggs cracked careful, coffee fresh. Isaiah stepped in with dew on his collar and hay on his sleeve. The look they traded wasn't romantic. It was understanding, which lasts longer. Cows don't wait, he said. Breakfast neither, she answered, sliding cakes onto a plate. The boys tumbled in, barefoot and eager, calling her Miss Odella, until she said plain, Odella will do. The rhythm of a family began to knock softly on the door. After dishes, she swept, aired out rooms, noticed the lilac off the back stoop, and tucked the scent away like a bomb. He asked her to help with wood. She stacked while he split, the work talking for them both. Never seen this much sky, she said at last. Makes a person feel small. His axe paused mid-fall. Sometimes that's a mercy. She told him she used to watch the street from a shop window back in Dayton. He said she didn't have to know where she fit yet. You just got here. That evening, the boys played on the floor. Isaiah mended tack, and Odella stitched a shirt in neat, patient bites of thread. When the house went quiet, she found a parcel left on her bed. Lavender soap, no note. She knew the giver by the shape of restraint. She set it on the table like a promise no one had dared to speak. The prairie wind kept breathing. So did the people in that house, and for the first time in a long while, those breaths felt like the beginning of something that might hold. That night, as embers settled in the stove and the boys dreamed, Odella lay awake with the blanket up to her chin, listening. Somewhere in that hush, a single truth rose clear as moonlight. Fear had made the journey west with her, but it hadn't unpacked yet. Days fell into a steady gait, like a good horse on a long trail. Morning light washed the kitchen boards the color of straw. Coffee sighed. The boys banged their spoons like drumsticks until Odella laughed under her breath and told them to hush gentle. Isaiah watched their faces, watched hers. A man who's lost too much learns to count blessings by sound. The scrape of chairs, the creak of a door, a woman humming while she sets a plate down. He didn't ask for more than that. Not yet. Odella found her footing in small ways. She marked each day with something she could improve and left the rest alone. Hinges got oiled, windows let in air, the wash line stopped sagging after she reset the stakes. When the boys tracked mud through the hall, she bit back a scold and pointed them to a rag by the door. Boots first, she said, steady as a school marm, but kinder. Hamilton liked a challenge and learned fast. Hayes forgot and remembered and forgot again, as little ones do. Patience held. Evenings Isaiah kept to the outer edges of the room, not distant, careful. He mended leather by lamplight, hands sure, knife gliding through worn straps. Odella stitched by the window so she could feel the last wind of the day. Sometimes she read a psalm in a voice barely above the flame. The boys went still at the sound. Isaiah did too. Those words turned the room into something warmer than timber and wool. They turned it into a harbor. On the fourth day, a wagon rattled in, sun bouncing off brass. The visitor sat tall and wiry, hair threaded silver under a hat brim carried too many summers. Ruthie Branner, she announced, right foot already on the ground. I brung bread, and the sort of talk no man tells right if he tries. She hugged Isaiah with a thump on the back that would have knocked a smaller fellow sideways, then turned straight to Odella. You the lady come by, coach? Not a question. Odella nodded. Ruthie pinned her with a clear gaze that said, I see you, and I see the shadow behind you, and I ain't scared of either. Good, Ruthie said. Some of the hens in town will cluck. Let 'em. You're here now. They cut the bread while children swarmed Ruthie for stories about runaways and rainstorms and the year the creek jumped its banks. Ruthie told every tale as if it belonged to the listener. She saved one for Isaiah and Odella alone. You two do right by each other, she said, wiping crumbs from the table. A house can break quiet, or it can break heavy. Pick quiet. She kissed both boys on their heads, cuffed Isaiah's sleeve when he reached for his wallet, and left before anyone could thank her properly. The gate clicked behind her like a promise held. Work drew Odella outdoors more. She learned the rhythm of the yard, the way the wind carried the smell of river weeds certain afternoons, the way the chickens fussed before sundown. Isaiah taught her to feed the team without getting nipped, to keep her hands wide and steady, to speak like she meant every word. She did. A woman from town dropped off a sack of flour in a stare that cut. Odella met it, calm as a pond. Some folks hold a grudge against anything new. She refused to carry it with them. Afternoons turned bright as a brass buckle. Odella spread a quilt under the cottonwoods and taught letters there. Hamilton took to words like he took to running, headlong and grinning. Hayes liked to draw circles and call them suns. That's home, he'd say, pressing the charcoal harder. That round thing there. He looked up at Odella as if making sure she understood which piece on paper meant safety. She did. She hung his picture by the stove with twine. That night, after the boys were down, Odella stood on the back stoop with the lavender soap in her palm. She could smell it, clean and simple. Isaiah stopped a yard away, hat in hand, old habits holding him still. He cleared his throat. I ain't sure how to say this without saying too much. She turned so he could see her face in the dim. Try me. He folded the hat, careful with the brim. You don't owe me anything you don't freely choose. If anyone in town says different, they can speak it to me first. The words didn't come quick. They came true. She set the soap back in its paper and let herself breathe easier. "Thank you," she said, "for the room. For the slow." He nodded once. "Slow's all I've got left worth offering." The wind carried frog song from the low ground. A coyote yipped far off, the sound thin and lonesome as a fiddle string stretched tight. Odella wasn't immune to loneliness. It just didn't boss her around the way it used to. She thought of the coach ride west, the way strangers watched her without seeing her. This place saw her. That counted. On Sunday, they hitched the mare and went to the little church behind the cottonwoods. People nodded. Some nodded twice. A few didn't. The hymn rolled up under the rafters and into the blue. Isaiah sang with the voice of a man who had learned to cradle grief without dropping it. Odella stood between his boys, one small hand in each of hers, and felt a heat behind her eyes she didn't let fall. Back home, an afternoon storm came stumbling over the mountains. Rain hit the roof in hard, happy fists. The family huddled by the window and watched the pasture drink. Odella laughed when Hayes tried to catch drops through a crack in the sash. "You'll flood us out," she warned. He giggled and shook his wet fingers onto Isaiah's sleeve. The man rumbled a laugh that shook dust from the quiet places inside him. After the storm passed, the air turned clean and cool. All the edges softened. Isaiah went to check fence. Odella and the boys gathered eggs and set a small feast of fried potatoes, leftover roast, and biscuits she'd coaxed tall. Dinner went easy. Bedtime went easier. Only the night wouldn't leave well enough alone. Sometime near midnight, a small cough came from the boys' room. Then another. Not the raspy bark of a cold. A deep tuck sound, like something trying to settle where it shouldn't. Odella sat up, blanket pooling at her waist, listening hard. The house listened with her. The cough came again, closer to a sob this time, and she was already on her feet when Isaiah's lamp flared in the hall. The lamplight wavered against the wall as Isaiah pushed open the door. Hayes sat upright in bed, cheeks flushed, eyes glassy with fever. Hamilton slept on, unaware of the storm rising inside that small room. Odella knelt beside the cot, pressing her palm to the boy's forehead. "He's burning," she whispered, voice tight. Isaiah set the lamp down, jaw working, helpless and scared in the same breath. "He was fine this evening," he said. "Played half the day in the yard." Odella reached for the basin, wrung out a cloth, and laid it gentle across Hayes's brow. The boy stirred, murmuring nonsense between breaths. "Get me more water," she said softly, not as an order, but a plea. Isaiah was gone before she finished the sentence. When he returned, the bucket sloshed against his leg. She worked in silence. Cool cloth, sip of water, another cloth, her movements sure, though her heart pounded loud enough to fill the room. Isaiah stood there, hatless, bare feet on cold floorboards, watching. The way she moved reminded him of his wife for a blink, then didn't. It was her own kind of calm, stubborn and clear-headed. Hours slipped by. The fever raged like a wildfire, refusing rain. Odella stayed through it, whispering prayers under her breath, wetting his lips, singing some half-remembered tune about home. Isaiah fetched wood, stoked the stove, carried buckets, did anything that kept his hands busy and his mind from breaking. Once near dawn, the boy's breathing turned shallow, and Isaiah froze. Odella didn't. She held Hayes close, rubbing his back, humming low until the wheeze evened out. When Isaiah met her eyes across the bed, What passed between them wasn't just worry. It was trust, born sudden and fierce. By sunrise, the fever began to crack. Sweat cooled the child's temples, haze sighed, heavy and spent. Odella leaned back against the wall, eyes red but dry. Isaiah crouched beside her. "You should rest," he said. "You look about to fall over." She shook her head. "I'll rest when he's steady." He hesitated, and then reached for her hand, callous thumb tracing the back of it once before he let go. "You saved him," he said quietly. "Maybe," she answered, "or maybe we both did." They sat there in that thin morning light, not speaking. The house seemed to exhale. Outside, roosters called, late but faithful. Hamilton stumbled in, rubbing his eyes, saw his brother asleep, and threw himself across the bed with relief. Isaiah smiled without meaning to. For the first time since the funeral months ago, he felt the tightness in his chest ease. When Odella finally rose, her legs trembled. Isaiah steadied her by the elbow. "Go lie down," he said. I'll watch him." She hesitated. "You sure?" He nodded. "I ain't much good with words, but I can sit still." She managed a weary smile. "Then I'll hold you to it." She slept deep and dreamless until noon. When she woke, Isaiah was still there, rocking slowly in the chair by the boys' room, hat tipped forward, arms folded. The quiet hum of his breathing filled the space. She watched him for a long minute before stepping away to the kitchen. Something had shifted, something that couldn't be undone. That evening, Ruthie rode up again, bringing broth and worry. "Heard the little one took sick," she said, setting her basket down. "Figured you could use a hand." Odella told her the worst had passed. Ruthie listened, eyes kind but sharp. "You care for them like they were your own," she said. "Maybe they already are." Odella blushed at that, but Ruthie's words sank deep. Later, after supper, when the boys were asleep again and the dishes done, Isaiah lingered near the door. He looked like he wanted to say something, but wasn't sure where to start. Finally, he cleared his throat. "When I asked for a bride, I thought I was asking for help. Didn't expect to find peace, too." She turned from the sink. "I didn't expect anything either," she said. "Guess that's how it sneaks up on you." The space between them thinned. The lantern flame flickered, painting soft gold on the edges of her face. "You don't have to stay," he said suddenly. "You've done more than I had any right to hope." Odella's voice came steady. "Maybe I want to." His breath caught, "Even after what folks say." "Let 'em talk," she said. "They don't live here." He wanted to touch her then, just a hand to her shoulder, but he didn't. Not yet. The time would come, and he'd know it by the quiet. That night, she checked on the boys one last time, then stepped outside. The stars had spilled across the black like seeds in soft dirt. She tilted her head back and let the cool wind wash over her. Behind her, the door creaked. Isaiah stood there, arms folded, gaze following the same stars. "You ever wonder," she asked, "why folks keep trying? Even when it all feels broken." He thought for a moment, "'cause stopping hurts worse." They stood that way until the cold bit through her shawl. He took it gently from her shoulders and draped it closer, his hands rough but careful. She didn't pull away. He didn't say goodnight. And she didn't need him to. The silence carried it for them both. Inside, Hayes breathed easy. The storm had passed, but something new was taking root. Something neither of them could name just yet. A week later, when the letter from Ohio arrived with her name on it, Odella's hands shook again. Only this time, it wasn't fear that made them tremble. The envelope came dusted in road grime, edges worn from miles of wagon and hand. Odella turned it over slow, thumb tracing her own name as if it belonged to someone else. Isaiah watched from across the table, trying not to ask, though the question hung heavy between them. "From home?" he said finally. She nodded, breaking the seal. The paper crackled like dry corn husk. She read once in silence, eyes moving steady until they stopped. Then she folded it back up, set it beside her cup, and looked toward the window where the prairie lights spilled thin and gold. "They want me to come back," she said. "My father passed. There's property to settle. They think I should return. For good." Isaiah leaned back slow, the chair groaning under his weight. "That's a fair distance," he murmured. "Far enough," she answered. Her voice had that faraway quiver the kind a person gets when the past tugs at their sleeve. "Dayton's got streets that don't change, neighbors who remember you when you wish they wouldn't." The boys burst in then, scattering dust and laughter, chasing a wooden hoop that clattered across the floor. Odella smiled despite herself, scooping Hayes into her lap, his curls brushing her chin. Isaiah watched the sight, her with the child, sunlight catching on both, and something in him tightened. When the noise settled, she met his eyes again. "I should go," she said softly, "just for a short while. Set things right." He nodded, though the words cost him. "If that's what you need." She searched his face, maybe hoping for a reason to stay. But Isaiah Keene wasn't the kind of man to hold someone by pleading. He learned too well what it meant to lose choice. "I'll get you to the station," he said, voice quiet but firm. "You shouldn't travel alone." 2 days later, dawn painted the hills in streaks of rose and dust. The wagon stood ready. Ruthie came to keep the boys until their pa returned. Odella packed light, a few dresses, the lavender soap, Hayes's drawing of the sun. Isaiah loaded the trunk, his motions careful as prayer. They rode without much talk. The road wound through grass tall enough to whisper against the wheels. A hawk circled overhead, its shadow gliding along the ruts beside them. Somewhere behind them, the ranch shrank to memory. Halfway to town, the silence cracked. "When you came here," Isaiah said, "you were scared." "I was," she answered. "Still are?" She thought on that. Maybe not of the same things. He nodded once, eyes on the horizon. "Ain't shame and fear, it just means you got something left to lose." Odella smiled faintly. "You always talk like that?" "Only when I mean it." At the station, the platform boards creaked under her boots. A train hissed down the track, all iron breath and thunder. Isaiah lifted her trunk aboard, then stepped back. She stood a moment, unsure of what to say. "You'll look after them?" "Till you're back," he said. "And if I don't come back," he swallowed, jaw working once before he spoke, "then I'll tell the boys you found peace, but I'll still keep a place for you here." She reached out, laid a hand on his sleeve. "You make it hard to leave, Mr. Keene." He tipped his hat, trying for a smile that didn't quite make it. "Then maybe that means I done something right." The whistle shrieked. Steam rose between them like a wall. She climbed aboard. He earned once more and found him still standing there, hat in hand, framed by the wide, wind-bitten plains. The train lurched, gathered speed, and his figure blurred into distance. The journey east was long. Odella watched the land flatten, turn green again, the sky closing tighter the farther she went. Dayton greeted her with smells she'd half forgotten. Coal smoke, rain-soaked brick, perfume from passing ladies who didn't look her way. Her father's lawyer met her at the depot, all starch and condolence. There were papers, sums, an empty house, heavy with silence. She wandered through the rooms that once held her childhood laughter and felt like a ghost, borrowing old air. Nights were worse. She'd lie awake to the sound of carriages and wonder if Isaiah had fixed the loose hinge on the barn, if Hamilton still forgot his hat in the field, if Hayes asked for her at bedtime. On the fourth evening, she found herself writing a letter by lamplight. The city feels smaller than it used to. I miss the wind. Tell the boys I keep them in my prayers. Tell yourself you don't owe me patience, but keep it anyway. She folded it, sealed it, and stared at her handwriting until her vision blurred. The next morning, she boarded the westbound train before the town had finished waking. Days later, Isaiah stepped out to mend a fence when he saw a cloud of dust on the road, the kind a coach makes when it's carrying more than mail. He froze, heart stuttering like a colt breaking into run. The door swung open, and there she was, travel-worn, eyes shining, breath catching on the cool Montana air. She set her bag down in the dirt and laughed, soft and trembling. I told you I'd only be gone a short while, she said. Isaiah took off his hat. You did, just didn't say how short. The boys came tearing down the path, hollering her name, tripping over each other in joy. She knelt to meet them, arms wide, laughter breaking loose like sunlight after a storm. Isaiah stood behind, watching the three of them fold together, and knew something sure as sunrise. She wasn't going anywhere again. That night, after supper, the talk turned quiet. The fire burned low. Odella glanced his way. I reckon I owe you an answer, she said. He raised a brow. To what? The question you never asked. Isaiah's voice dropped low. You staying? She smiled through tired eyes. If you'll have me. Outside, the wind swept along the grass, carrying the scent of lilac and rain. Isaiah reached for her hand, and though he didn't speak yet, every heartbeat between them whispered the same truth. Home had finally found them both. The wedding was plain, just the way life on the frontier allowed. No lace, no choir, no grand procession. The preacher came up from town in a borrowed wagon, Bible tucked under one arm and dust clinging to his coat. The boys fidgeted on the steps while Ruthie stood, grinning wide enough to fill the whole yard. Odella wore a blue calico dress Isaiah had bought months before, folded away for a day he hadn't dared imagine. He mended his only suit, brushing it clean until the cloth gave off a faint scent of cedar. When he turned to see her walking down the porch steps, sunlight caught her hair and turned it to amber fire. He forgot to breathe for a beat. The vows were spoken soft and sure, the preacher's voice drifting into the wind like smoke. Isaiah promised steadiness more than romance, and Odella promised presence more than perfection. When the man of God asked if he'd take her hand, Isaiah didn't look at the preacher at all. He looked straight at her, eyes steady as the horizon, and said, I already did. Ruthie wiped at her eyes. Hamilton whooped loud enough to wake the hens. Hayes asked if that meant they could call her Mama now. Odella laughed through tears. If you want to, sweetheart, she said, pulling him close. The preacher chuckled, signed his book, and left them to the celebration that wasn't much of a party. Just stew, cornbread, and the sound of laughter strong enough to shake the rafters. That night, after Ruthie had gone and the boys were asleep, Isaiah found Odella out by the cottonwoods. The moon hung low, bathing everything silver. She turned as he stepped onto the grass, that easy smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "Didn't figure a man like you for nerves," she teased. He came closer, hands deep in his pockets. "Guess I ain't had much practice with forever." "You think this is forever?" He nodded, eyes soft. "Feels that way." She reached up, brushing her fingers against his jaw. "Then let's live like it." They stood quiet for a while, the air filled with the slow heartbeat of crickets. Somewhere far off, a coyote called to the night. He pulled her close, careful, reverent, like a man holding the first warm thing he'd found in years. The kiss they shared wasn't young or rushed, it was steady, the kind built from long winters and harder prayers. Weeks slipped into months. The ranch took on a new rhythm. Isaiah's boots by the door beside Odella's, laughter echoing off the barn walls, the smell of fresh bread meeting the scent of horses and hay. Each sunrise found them shoulder to shoulder, mending fences or chasing runaway hens, trading smiles over the simplest victories. Spring rolled into summer, and with it came new life. Odella's hands lingered more often at her waist, a small knowing in her eyes. Isaiah caught on before she ever said a word. He didn't ask. He just wrapped his arm around her and rested his palm there, where the future was already beating beneath his touch. The day she told the boys, Hamilton puffed up like a little man and vowed to help with chores. Hayes climbed into her lap and whispered, "Can I sing to the baby?" She laughed until tears came. By autumn, the house smelled of wood smoke and stew again, but it was different now, fuller somehow, alive. Ruthie visited with quilts and stories, bringing half the town's goodwill in her basket. "You've gone and made this place shine," she told Odella, patting her hand. "Ain't no ghost of grief left here, just light." Odella smiled. "It's not just me, it's all of us." Winter settled hard that year, snow piling against the door, wind crying like a lost child in the rafters. But inside, they were warm. Isaiah sat by the fire, rocking Hayes to sleep, while Odella hummed from her chair. She was big with child, the glow of lamplight soft against her face. "You ever think," she said after a while, "how far we've come since that first morning?" He chuckled low. "Every day. Feels like 2 lifetimes ago. I was scared out of my wits." "I know," he said, "So was I, just didn't show it as well." She laughed, the sound quiet and content. "You did fine." He leaned over, brushing a kiss against her forehead. "So did you, Mrs. Keene." The title still felt new and sweet in her ears. "Thank you for letting me find home again," she whispered. He smiled, eyes glinting like firelight on whiskey. "You didn't find it," he said. "You built it." Outside, the wind howled over the hills, carrying the scent of pine and snow. Inside, a baby kicked, and the room filled with soft laughter, the sound of a life mended, of hearts made whole. Odella closed her eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of the fire, the quiet breath of her boys, the calm strength in Isaiah's voice when he started humming that old tune she'd sung over Hayes months ago. It had no name, no words, just the melody of belonging. The world beyond the windows could keep its noise and its grief. In this little house, under a wide Montana sky, love had taken root deep and sure as the cottonwoods out back. And from that night on, no matter what storms rolled down from the mountains, they faced them the same way they'd faced everything, side by side, with steady hands and hearts that refused to quit.